It's fine to have your duke it out and, do all the dirty work of putting the coalition together. But it's probably better to have the actual fighting and nitty-gritty done behind closed doors instead of it's happening on Twitter.
Can coalitions work with so many small parties? I posed this question to Marius Roodt of the IRR in a recent episode of my podcast. What follows is a short extract from our longer conversation. You can watch the full-length interview by clicking on the link in the description below. Enjoy. So, why are we seeing these tensions? Why is that glue that was holding these parties together starting to dissolve?
Yeah, I think it's a problem that we see in coalitions around the world. There has to be something holding the parties together that's more than just being an anti-something. And we've seen in South Africa that there's been, a lot of these parties have just come together because they oppose the ANC. There has to be some kind of broader ideological glue, I think, holding parties together. I think that's part of the reason why we've seen so they weren't really coalitions, but kind of confidence and supply agreements between the EFF and the DA after 2016 really didn't work. The two parties are just so diametrically opposed. If it's on issues of the market economy, on non-racialism, even on foreign policy, or definitely on issues such as land reform and so on, the parties are, on very opposite sides of the spectrum. So we see lots of these ructions and so on happening between parties. So it's not even South Africa. It's not unique to South Africa. It's also happened, for example, in a place like Israel, where a coalition of parties came together to overthrow the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. That coalition has only lasted about just over a year because the parties that came together didn't have anything really in common. I mean, we had right-wing Zionists along with left-wing Arab parties. The only reason they were in a coalition was to get rid of Benjamin Netanyahu. Once they'd done that, it was pretty hard to govern when you don't really have too much in common. So I think we've seen this in South Africa where, and also I think the EFF itself is quite a bit of an agent of chaos. Sometimes, it's not too clear where it stands. Sometimes it's anti-ANC, sometimes it's pro-ANC. So it's been quite difficult. Also, when it comes to South African parties, I think a lot of it is transactional. I think the Patriotic Alliance is definitely a very good example of that. It's basically in it for what it can get for, I think, not to speak out of turn, but what it can get for the leaders in the party. I'm not too sure how interested it is in providing decent services for the residents of various places where it's on the council. I mean, Johannesburg is obviously an important example. And I think there's also issues of personal animosity between various people in political parties. It seems that issues are more of one-upmanship are becoming more important than providing services to to the residents of cities and so on. And we know there's definitely levels of personal animosity between senior leaders in Action SA and the Democratic Alliance, going back to even before Herman Mashaba was involved in the party. And we've seen, there's lots of unedifying spectacles on social media where senior DA leaders and senior Action SA leaders are really tearing chunks out of each other on social media. And, of course, this isn't to say that everybody has to get on all the time and we have to pretend that, it's all unicorns and fairies in South African politics. But I do think a lot of this kind of thing needs to take place behind closed doors. I mean, if we can look at somebody like Otto von Bismarck, to modify a phrase he said, where when making laws is like making sausages. You don't want to see what happens behind closed doors. And I think maybe something like that has to be when we talk about coalitions. It's fine to have your duke it out and, do all the dirty work of putting the coalition together. But it's probably better to have the actual fighting and nitty-gritty done behind closed doors instead of it's happening on Twitter. But I think this is all this kind of thing. I mean, all these combination of these factors has led to fairly unstable coalitions across the country. And it'll be interesting to see how long the coalition now in Johannesburg lasts. And it seems that the coalition there, Ekurhuleni, is also going to collapse pretty soon. There is a motion of no confidence being prepared in Mayor Tanya Campbell. That's also definitely something to, or maybe the week after, but anyway, it's within the next couple of weeks. But that's something to watch. And yeah, it's the people who suffer the most at the end of the day when it comes to these unstable coalitions is the residents of the places where these coalitions govern.
Yeah, and I think this raises the likelihood of checkbook politics where councillors might be bribed. Particularly, I think small parties are quite vulnerable to this. So Helen Zilles wrote a piece over the weekend where she said that a lot of these small parties, there's very high levels of internal contestation for very few leadership posts. That often raises the stakes. And often the participation of that party in a broader coalition is seen as a bargaining chip. and something to be fought over, then that brings the whole coalition cascading down. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, we saw fisticuffs being thrown at a COPE press conference. That just shows you just how internally turbulent some of these smaller parties are. So do you think Helen Zilles is right in that critique that we have too many small parties proliferating the political landscape, and this heightens their role as kingmakers and makes these coalitions essentially unworkable?
Yes, definitely. And lots of these small parties, they might just be in it for kind of, as you said, checkbook politics, or they might be, kind of motivated by ethnic concerns or whatever the case is. But I suppose that's what it comes down to now. How do we create kind of stable politics, but also let as many different kind of interests and so on get involved in the formal political process, which is part of the point of proportional representation. Helen Zilles, in that same article that you're talking about, also spoke about the concept of thresholds. So in most proportional representation systems around the world have some level of an electoral threshold. So for a party to make it into parliament, they'll generally have to reach a certain level of support to secure those seats that they'd be entitled to. So in Germany and New Zealand, for example, it's 5%. Sweden, I think it's 4%. Some other places are a bit lower. I think Israel's 3.25%. So, but for a political party to make it into parliament, it has to reach a certain minimum level of support. So maybe that's something we can look at in South Africa. It'll certainly go some way to stabilizing the electoral or our politics and so on. But there's also some problems with that. There's also, is it actually, some people argue it's fundamentally undemocratic to say that just because that somebody needs or certain interest group or party should be excluded from the political process because they don't have enough support. But I mean, in South Africa, there's an implicit threshold. Not every political party gets heard in parliament. It's got to reach a certain amount level of support, which is effectively about 0.2% of the vote. So there's some things to look at, and it might go some way to stabilizing our politics. But then looking back in South Africa's history, for example, if we'd had a 5% threshold in our first post-apartheid election in 1994, the predecessor to the DA, the Democratic Party, only got 1.7% of the vote. It would have, and say we'd had a threshold of about 5%, the DP wouldn't have made it into parliament. And actually only 3 parties would have made it into parliament, would be the ANC, the National Party, and the IFP. So it would have definitely changed our politics. And at the same time, people can also be disenfranchised through issues such as thresholds. There have been cases around the world, I think it was in Ukraine, where up to 20% of people's votes didn't count because they voted for parties that didn't make it to the electoral threshold. So they're effectively disenfranchised. And that is something that proportional representation is supposed to guard against. So there's definitely pros for an issue of electoral threshold, but there's also cons. And I think it's something South Africans have to look at. But at the end of the day, I think what it comes down to is that South African political parties need to be a bit more mature about these kinds of things. As I say, the people who suffer the most with these unstable coalitions and chopping and changing of mayors and mayoral committees and so on is people who are living in these municipalities, where they're the ones who are suffering from lack of services and all kinds of other things, and you say checkbook politics. So it's something to look at, but I think it's something South Africa needs to think about. And when we get to coalition politics at national level, it could be a case where a party with only 1 or 2 seats is kind of the kingmaker and could bring the national government. And we have to ask, is that something we want in South Africa? That's also part of the reason why coalitions in Germany have been so stable. They have that, as I said, the 5% threshold in Germany, and for most of Germany's history, they've been governed almost always in coalition since the end of World War II, but normally only with 2 parties in coalition, whether it was one of the 2 bigger ones, the CDU or the Social Democrats, governing generally with the Free Democrats, sort of liberal party, or in a grand coalition. And I'm open to correction, but I believe this current 3-party coalition that's governing Germany at the moment, between the Social Democrats, the Free Democrats, and the Greens, is the first time that a coalition of more than 2 parties has ever governed Germany at national level since World War II. So, and as I say, part of the stability is because of the threshold that Germany implemented after World War II.
Thanks for watching. Let's hand over to you, our audience. Do you think South Africa has too many small parties? Leave your thoughts down in the comment section. Also, if you enjoyed this discussion, you might want to check out the full-length interview with Marius Roodt. That's linked over here. You can also subscribe to my other channel for more long-form conversations. That's linked over here. My name is David Ansara. Until next time, take care.